All right. And we are live. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another Leadership Live with JJ Hardy and me, Chris Pienkowski. JJ, Happy New Year. This is our first episode of the new year.
I know. I'm pumped, man. This year is going to be amazing. Happy New Year to you as well. I have so many new things going on, not only with my business, but in my family and plans. And so I'm sure you do too. That's just kind of how it works. But I'm pumped. And these chats with you are probably one of my favorite things to do every couple of weeks. So let's do it.
Same here, man. I really enjoy these. Today's episode is we're going to be talking about simplifying. And, one of the things that I think a lot of leaders get stuck with is overcomplicating, whether it's overcomplicating a challenge, overcomplicating, their goals. And a lot of times people just get kind of stuck in the mud, for lack of a better word. And they don't think about how to simplify or even why to simplify. So I guess what are your thoughts on that? Like why is it important to simplify, JJ?
Well, first of all, you don't want to overthink things because you don't want to get stuck. But there's an acronym that I know we've talked about in the past called KISS, Keep It Stupid Simple, or Keep It Simple Stupid. Whoever you are, wherever you are, you always say it different. But, that's important because, say you're in a leadership position and now you created this plan. It's so robust that nobody can really understand it except for you. That's a problem. And that will not, even though that may not have created a mental block for you, when you're articulating those plans to your down trace leaders or, even just to a small team of execution level employees, you're going to lose them. I mean, I always tell people that when you are communicating anything, whether it's a plan and it can be on the phone and writing, teaching a class, whatever, you have to make everything you say short and so simple that a 5-year-old can understand it. Or I like how, I think it might have been Donald Miller. He said it in his book where he talks about crafting your message, where he says that you need to make it so simple to understand that a caveman that does nothing but grunt all the time can understand it.
I like that. And, I like how you went to communication because there are so many different kind of categories that being able to simplify falls into. And you and I have talked so many times about the fact that communication is really the foundation of leadership, right? It's if we can't communicate effectively, and that means providing and receiving information, but to be able to communicate to the lowest common denominator, right? You could be giving a speech to a mixed crowd from executives down to the front line, the person at the front desk. You've got to be communicating to the person at the front desk all the time, and that really helps us as leaders to dial in our messaging, right? Who am I talking to? Thinking about it from a caveman standpoint, I love that analogy because if you can get your point across to a caveman in simple, digestible, bite-sized pieces, then the chances of anyone kind of higher up on the food chain understanding what you're talking about are just going to be exponentially higher.
You're right. And gosh, I wish I could remember what the name of the book was. I have it right across the desk here, but Donald Miller does a great job explaining why that's important. And, it is important I don't like calling people the lowest common denominator.
Right.
What I really like calling them, though, not calling them, the label that I put on that type of a person is the one with the least amount of experience.
I like that.
If you can speak to somebody about a topic that requires a lot of know-how and make it understandable enough for that person that has the least amount of experience, you'll be able to communicate it across all platforms. And oh, by the way, the higher you go, the more simple it needs to be, because people just have too much on their plate to be able to take large amounts of information. It needs to be simple because they need to look at it, understand it, and move on.
That's right.
And you're avoiding what you talked about in the very beginning of this, which is that block. If people don't understand what's happening in their organization or on their team because it wasn't communicated well, or maybe there's a new task that they don't quite get because it wasn't portrayed properly, whether it was in writing or maybe verbally to them, then that's going to cause a block.
Yeah.
And the least of, when you communicate in your company, you want to verbally, especially through conversation, you want to be focusing on building relationships. You don't always want to spend all your time picking up the phone or sending emails, asking questions all the time, because it just bogs down all of your time. If you pick up the phone or walk across the warehouse floor or go out into the yard and talk to your truck drivers or whatever the case may be, you want to spend that time building relationships and making sure people have what they need to as far as assistance is concerned, to get the job done. Reporting should be the least of your concerns, because that should be systematic.
And when we think about relationships and communicating for that purpose, I know for me, I'd rather someone talk to me like a person. Like, you know what? Let's be level with each other. Let's shoot straight. And those communications should be simple, right? When people are trying to throw 50-cent words at me and they're trying to come across as knowing more than I do, I mean, what's my impression of that person? Why are you trying to impress me? Right? Impressing me is not going to help to build a relationship.
Nope.
Being down to earth with me is going to build a relationship. And that's a simple conversation.
Yeah, I like that, because I was just if you didn't say it, I was going to say it. That is how you simplify that communication. And you're right. That's why active listening is so important. When I'm communicating a task to an employee, or maybe talking about a subject with another manager, even if we're on the same kind of the lateral scale, peers, I always make sure I say, so what did you get from that?
Yep.
And I always make sure whether people ask me that or not, when they're communicating with me, that I make sure I provide that same level of feedback, because it's important to know that they understood what was said. The worst thing you can do in a conversation is, or when you're giving instructions especially, is to say something to somebody and just walk away with an expectation.
Well, yeah. If the expectation is not clear on both sides, then you're missing the mark.
Which is kind of part of, keeping it simple, right? If you don't have any questions when you walk away from a conversation, because that what you said was heard, understood, and acknowledged, it's actually in their brain now, they know what you said, then if that task that you told them to do or asked them to help you with or whatever, you can kind of dump it and move on to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
Not that you should forget about, somebody else's work or anything like that, but it's important when you're managing multiple things. That's part of being manager versus leader. Yeah, you have that personal aspect, but you got to make sure the job's getting done too.
That's right. And, from the other side of the coin, one of the things that we also have talked about is our role as leaders is to coach the people who we're leading.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, what I'll say from a simplification standpoint is, if someone's providing me information and they seem to be getting maybe too far in the weeds, or they're too high level, I'll actively say, hey, you know what? Talk to me like I'm 5 years old. Explain this to me like I'm your 5-year-old kid, and pretend that I'm the dumbest person in the room. Talk to me that way.
Yeah.
You're not only helping them to communicate better, but you're learning to pick up those cues through that active listening of, man, that person's just losing me here. When do I need to like snap in and say, hey, dial it down. Talk to me like I've got 3 brain cells to rub together on a good day.
Which is usually how much we have available, to be quite honest. Gosh, it's probably worse now that we're private business owners than it was when we were actually working in these organizations.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I agree with you. Simplification is good for a lot of things. Let's move that into like a planning conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that people get bogged down with when they're planning, I don't know, a training event, or maybe they're planning a set of goals for their team or what have you. They think they have to plan everything all the way down to the eaches. And then you're right. They start getting blocked up and they don't use their resources. Keep it simple. When you are making a plan, come up with as many key tasks as you possibly can. There's nothing wrong with inviting your peers or your team, or maybe even your first line, or maybe his peers as well, into a planning conversation. Mm-hmm. Because when you are in your own vacuum, I don't care how good you are, you screw things up.
That's right.
And it's not perfect. No person is perfect. I say I probably shouldn't bring divinity into a conversation, but the Lord didn't create any of us the same way. So what makes you think that your ideas are the only one that's going to make things successful? So right. At the end of the day, involving others and putting your pride aside, because that's what keeps you from doing so. Now those little tasks that you simplified, and it's a conversation starter. This is what the overall mission is. This is the expectation, and this is what I came up with. What does everybody think?
Right.
And then move forward.
The other thing too, that when you're trying to look for ways to simplify, excuse me, you're also you're detaching. And that's another thing that, maybe a topic for another day, is why it's important to detach and be able to look up and out as opposed to down and in. So having the mindset of, I got to keep it simple, can help you a lot of times to identify when you need to raise your head and say, all right, am I overcomplicating things? And that can be applied in so many different ways.
I saw your short video that you made on that, by the way.
Yeah.
But you're right. The one thing you got to understand, when I want to clarify what stepping back means.
Mm-hmm.
So think about what is going to make things easier for everybody. So everyone has their own role that they play in their organization, maybe on their team. If they own the business, you still, in your job, it requires you to think and act differently. It just is what it is. There's really no way to not have that happen. You're focused on different things than everybody else is. So when you take a step back, what you're doing, it's actually applying the principles of servant leadership, because you're trying to figure out from another person's foxhole how to think about what you're doing and apply it to how they would perceive it and start creating a plan that way. So when you step back, you're not in your role, you're in somebody else's. Mm-hmm. You're trying to think of everything so that when it's time to brief somebody on it, you'll be applying the way that they would do things to your idea.
Yes.
And I don't know if I said that very well, but it's important to think about the way other people would do things when you're planning, because you're not going to be the one executing 9 times out of 10.
That's right. And the other thing too, And you just said this, I want to take it a step further, but you know, simple doesn't always equate to easy. But, just because something is hard doesn't mean that it has to be complicated.
No,
So you can do hard things in a very simple way and still reach the same outcomes.
that's right.
I think a lot of people get hung up on, you know, the scale of the goal is so big, it's going to be so hard to reach it. Therefore, the solution probably has to be complicated, and that is absolutely wrong.
Yep. Well, you're right. So let's take, for example, that I've encountered this many times being a former soldier, but when let's take the idea of starting a business.
Mhm.
I'm not, and I want to make it clear to the audience who's potentially listening that this is not a plug for what we do. It's a plug for anyone who has a service to help a business thrive. And when you start a business, the reason that it's important to have funds available and stuff like that is because when you, depending on what your niche is, I mean, if you're selling candles, this might not apply to you, but you still have to create efficiencies, but it's not going to be the same thing.
Right.
But when you have a business that you're starting, there are experts all over the place in different facets of this. Maybe you're really good at operations, but you don't know anything about selling and marketing. Well, if that's your weakness, what should you hire out? When you're in a business and you have a bunch of employees, say you're in a corporation and you have a bunch of employees. If you are up here, maybe you're a director and you have a team, or maybe you have a bunch of other peers in different subject areas, and maybe one of those peers is marketing, and you came up with this idea and you went to your boss and you got buy-in on it, and part of the process is to take it to market. Well, why are you going to do that on your own?
Right.
Get the expert and go out there and tackle it with not just help, the right help. There are so many ways to get stuff done. Oh, I froze. Can you still hear me?
I can hear you, but yeah, you're frozen.
Yeah, that's a really weird look too. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to keep on going. It's like ad-libbing in while you're acting. So yeah, making sure that you are receiving help when you're doing things, that is not it is a vulnerability, but it's important to make sure that you understand that you are not strong in everything. So in the realm of simplification, you want to streamline your way to getting a task accomplished, get the right person to help you with it, and suck up your pride a little bit.
Well,
When you're proud and when you get your ego involved, you're going to fall on your face more often than not. You're going to look stupid.
yeah. And that's a great point, because experts in whatever area will most likely know the simple path, right? Because they've seen it so many times, they know the that path from A to B and how to get there. Um, you know, and that applies in so many ways. Last summer, I built a deck at my parents' house, and while I'm handy and I come from a family of carpenters, I know how to do this. My uncle, who is a journeyman carpenter, was like, "What the heck are you doing here? You're adding 7 steps to what needs to be done. Here's where we need to go." So, those experts, absolutely put your ego aside and get the feedback from experts, because they're going to help you to simplify. Um, simple brainstorming, simple, like, hey, let's problem solve here, simplify it. How do we make it efficient and rock and roll?
Yep, I agree. I know it's a little bit uncomfortable that I'm like not moving or anything while we're doing this live stream here, but we're just going to have to go ahead and work through it.
Well,
Whatever you can do to avoid getting trapped in your own head. So many people, there are things like imposter syndrome where people tell themselves they can't do it. There are many other ways that people just they overcomplicate it. They think, oh my gosh, that is such a big thing to do. How am I ever going to get that accomplished? And what happens is they don't even start.
Right.
Well, I'm gonna keep it simple and say that if you're really blocked up in your planning, even if you think it's too hard, if you know there's something that you can accomplish, and we talked about this in our last live stream, I believe, just go out there and do it. There's a saying, you never know unless you try.
Yep.
And you're never going to know whether or not you can accomplish something if you haven't even put your best foot forward and given it a shot in the first place.
That's right. So what are some practical ways that people could just simplify? I know for me, when I look at a problem or I look at a challenge, whatever it is, I start to break it down into smaller bite-sized pieces, right? The old saying is, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Yep.
So I always like to dissect what it is and start to kind of put things in priority order. All right, what's step 1, step 2, step 3? And from there, you can come up with your sub steps and everything. But to me, that's the first step in simplification is, all right, let's lay it out. Let's understand what the end goal is that we're trying to reach here. Whatever it is, we're solving a problem for X. We're trying to reach a business goal. We're trying to help train up a new group of people in the warehouse to get them more efficient. Let's start with the end goal in mind. And now let's reverse engineer it. And let's get down to step 1. Step 1, get moving. Like you said, right? You never know until you try. But that's always been my approach is let's reverse engineer, come up with the steps, and let's kind of figure it out. And I don't get too far ahead in the steps. If it's a 10-step process, I'm only focused on step 1 to begin with. And then as step 1 starts, now I'm focused on step 2. It's not looking too far ahead. I think that also overcomplicates things.
You're right. And actually, as much as I tell people the same thing, I think you helped me a little bit with that when we did some of our annual planning last month. I had a lot of stuff on my list. And I was trying to figure out what my 50-meter target should be. And you kind of helped me simplify that. Well, you didn't give me those 50-meter targets, but we identified them through conversation.
Yes.
I also believe in using systems. There are many things that you can not only be taught, but you can have as a checklist when you're going through. Maybe you're trying to solve a problem or make a goal or whatever. I believe in reverse engineering too, backwards planning, however you want to call it. Same thing. But when you're making a goal, sometimes if it seems too daunting, run it through the SMART format and see if it'll actually work.
Yes.
It's out there for a reason because there are tons of people that get caught in their goal setting process. Can you achieve it? Is it measurable? All of those things. It's important to understand that. If you're stuck on where to start, run it through an existing process. If you're at work and you're trying to solve a problem, keep it simple. There are people out there that teach many different problem solving processes, but I keep the 7 steps to problem solving. Identify the problem, list the facts, create solutions, analyze the solutions, compare them. Oh gosh, I put myself on blast here. Make and implement the decision and evaluate. Yeah. So, these are all out there. And by the way, if you want them, you can get them from someone like us, or Google's a pretty good friend these days.
Yeah,
I hate to tell you, but your solution is usually only a couple of clicks away. And if you can't figure it out with those things, then it's time to talk to somebody who's been there and done that. That could be on your already existing team, or as I said earlier, if you're a business owner, especially, use your resources. They're out there. Find someone you trust, pay them, get it off your plate, and move on to the next thing.
that's right. And that's also another, you know, thought about simplifying. What what can be taken off of your plate and delegated to someone else?
Oh,
Um,
delegate. Yeah.
looking for those shared resources um, is another way to simplify what's going on in your life and not having to feel like you need to carry the weight of everything on your shoulders.
Yep. Yep. At the end of the day, the whole concept of leadership is serving others, and you can't serve others if you don't have anybody to serve. And so you have to have a community of people that you that you have and you surround yourself with, whether you're low on that totem pole or you're high on that totem pole. It doesn't really matter where you are from a hierarchy standpoint. What really matters is that you build yourself a team,
Yeah,
and that team could be nothing more than a family. It could be a group of peers that you've worked with in the past. It could be just some trusted confidants that you see on a regular basis. It does not matter. If you
right.
try to solve problems by yourself, you'll be successful to a certain extent, but there's always, and even if you have a team, there's always a certain amount of failure. But everyone has their own experiences, and you can't be expected to be reliant on only what you know. Communities are
Absolutely
out
right.
there for a reason. Yeah.
So, JJ, what are some trigger points that we can talk about that would help people to understand when they need to simplify? Like, at what point does someone need to kind of step back and evaluate, is this too complicated? Should it be? Could it be simplified? Um, what do you see that's common that kind of sparks that reaction in people?
Well, life is all about quality. And so one thing that I think that is a really good indicator as to whether or not you need to either receive assistance or find a way to simplify something is that if you've been banging your head against the wall trying to figure something out and you can't do it, and that doesn't mean you give up. That means now there's time to use a resource, whether it's a book or the internet or a friend or hiring somebody out. As a business owner, sometimes that's always the smartest thing to do. But there are so many ways, but usually when you have tried and failed and replanned and tried again and you just can't, it seems like everything you're doing is not working. There's going to be a simple solution because there are people out there that have done it.
Right.
So that, I think that's a good indicator. What do you think, Chris?
You know, one of the indicators that I see, and I see it in myself, is that sometimes when something becomes too complicated, if you allow yourself to be distracted by shiny objects and you find yourself kind of off task because you've almost mentally checked out, like, yeah, I've been beating my head against the wall here. It seems super complicated. And now I just need to take a little mental break and maybe I'm going to go scroll social media or I'm going to do something that is not involved with that task. To me, that's a trigger to say, is what I'm doing too complicated and can it be simplified? Like I'm losing interest here or I'm being frustrated. So is that time for me to evaluate, detach, and simplify?
Yeah. And maybe it's to move on to something else for just a short amount of time. But I agree, especially when you're working in a job on somebody else's dime or on your own. It's important to make sure that you have a constant list of tasks that you're working on every day, so that if you need a brain break from that one thing, that either A, you can step back a little bit and get away from all technology and the job itself and take a quick break, or sometimes it just takes moving on to something else, and you'll have that aha moment.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll be like, well, I think this might work. And you'll go back to the other thing after you finish what you're working on and get it done. But
Right.
never, ever give up on something. I mean, I think that if you are, I keep on talking about community. You always have to have somebody in your back pocket that you can rely on as either a mentor or a coach or just a friend to get you through something. I'm really struggling with this. I've been dealing with this with my wife forever. This is non-professional, but it's the same thing. I want to give it up. Well, you need somebody to talk you off that ledge and maybe help you come up with a solution that's not already in your brain.
Yes.
It's the same thing with work. Before you just give up, see if you've exhausted everything before it's something that you just write off.
That's right. Yeah. You don't want to, giving up should not be an option until you've exhausted all of your options. And, sometimes you do need to walk away from things.
Yep.
So, I don't want to give the impression to people that continue fighting a losing battle. If you know that the outcome is not going to be what you want, but at the same time, sticking it out and just looking for other ways to come up with a solution is really where the progress and the success happens.
Agreed.
So I know we're about 2 minutes over. So let's move to wrap things up here. And, like we always say, if you've got questions, comments, please drop them into the comment section on whatever platform you're watching this on. So whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, wherever you're consuming this content, drop in your comments and we will keep this conversation going. So if you've got questions about simplifying, if you've got scenarios like, hey, I want to run something past somebody, because we've talked about that a lot today, the importance of having a sounding board, do that in the comments. And, JJ and I will get back to you. We will answer these comments because we want this to be interactive and we want people to get the most out of it. Any closing thoughts from you, JJ, before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I just kind of want to add to what you said, both echoing it and adding just a little bit. If it resonated with you and if we mentioned something in this video that was a pain point for you, there's a very good chance that it's a pain point for somebody else.
Yes.
Chris and I, we are not in business to flap our jaws and build our ego. That's not why we're here. Right. We're here to literally help businesses and individuals succeed. It's my whole goal in life. I have a certain skill set that people trained me on for many, many years, and so is Chris. We've developed it. We know just enough to make sure that we can make other people successful because we have a framework and we want to help. If you have a question, use that to your advantage. We're not going to reach through the computer and smack your wrist for typing something in the chat. No, if you owe it to those people that might also learn from those comments to make sure you say something and share it with your audience if it resonated with you. If it didn't, you're not our people, and that's okay too. But like it, subscribe to it, share it, repost it, whatever platform you're on, please do it and make sure that we're spreading the word, because at the end of the day, people deserve the opportunity to be successful. That's why we're here. Don't shortchange yourself because you're afraid to put yourself out there.
That's right. So JJ, I'm going to end us on that note because that was, excuse me, that was an awesome wrap up. So we will see everybody back here again in 2 weeks for another Leadership Live with JJ Hardy and me, Chris Pienkowski. Until then, have an awesome weekend, awesome couple of weeks, and we will see you back soon.
Take care, everybody.